Hi guys, welcome to Microsoft ERP Beginners Tutorial Series. In this episode, we are going to discuss about how to create a vendor master in the system and what is a party and how a party is associated with a vendor master and what are the different ways to create a vendor master. So all these are the agenda for today's episode. So with that note, let's get started. So for creating a vendor, you need to click on the breadcrumb bar and navigate to the procurement and sourcing module. Under the vendor section, click on the all vendor. ADC Motor being a new legal entity, it doesn't have any vendor record in the system at the moment. So let's create our first vendor in the system. Click on the new button. So that will lead us to the vendor creation form. And this is our first serial number for this vendor. So if you remember, we made the number sequence as automatic. So a vendor account number is auto generated in this case. So you can tag your vendor as either as an organization or a person depending on your business situation. In the enterprise business, in most of the cases your vendor would be an organization, so I leave it like that. And you may need to give a name to your vendor. So let me consider this vendor as my Mercedes-Benz vendor who is going to supply the spare parts for my ADC Motor legal entity. So that's going to be the name of this vendor. And one of the very important and the mandatory field for creation of vendor is the vendor group. So for creating a vendor group, you need to right click, and at the moment we do not have any vendor group in the system, as you can see. So for creating a vendor group, right click, view details, and get into the vendor group. Or the full path is you need to navigate to the procurement and sourcing module and get into the setup section and click on the vendor group. So that's a direct path for getting into the vendor group. So let's create some vendor group, as these are very important master data we need to be filled in this legal entity. So let me first create a parts vendor. It only allows to fill 10 characters, so let me keep it short. Description can be long. Parts vendor. And another very important thing about the vendor group is even under the vendor group level, it's possible for us to tag the terms of payment, and this will be then inherited into your purchase order. But in the normal situation scenario, we do not inherit or provide the terms of payment in the vendor group level. We normally prefer tagging the terms of payment within the vendor master level, so I'm not going to tag the terms of payment, but do remember that the vendor group provides you with a provision and enables you to inherit the terms of payment from the vendor group. So this is my first vendor group, and the second vendor group is going to be my service vendor. Service vendor. And the third one is going to be my interco vendor, intercompany vendor. And my fourth vendor is going to be just a other category. Okay, so these are some of the vendor group I wanted to create. So let's save it and go back to our vendor and tag this as a spare part vendor. That's part vendor. And you can also roughly mention the size of your supplier, that is how many employees the supplier has, and if the supplier has any specific registration number or any organization number, you can mention that here. And the ABC classification is if you're having a business process where you wanted to classify your vendor based on its size, or based on its high value, or based on its importance or dependency to you, a company, you can classify the vendor with the ABC, and it's just for the reporting purpose. At the moment, I'm not going to give any classification code. And this field is a number provided by a government authority. This field is normally used in a case of a healthcare or medical device industry, but at this moment I'm not going to use this number. And if your company is popularly known by some other name, like for example MB dealer or something like that, so you can just mention it here, a very popularly known name. And the language is very important. You might need to specify the language specific to this particular vendor. In this case, I'm going to keep it as English US. And vendor collaboration is we do have a separate module in the application called as vendor collaboration, and we of course will discuss this in multiple episodes in future. But to give you an overview, the vendor collaboration is in the Dynamic 365. It provides an ability. For example, in this case, our legal entity is ADC Motors. So the ADC Motors now will have an ability to collaborate with their vendor and provide the vendor with a vendor collaboration platform where all their suppliers and vendors can effectively collaborate with the ADC Motors. Meaning, the vendor through the vendor collaboration portal, it can also be accessed through a mobile application or even the desktop. So the vendor can log into the vendor portal and they can view the pending purchase order which are awaiting for their confirmation, or the RFQs which are awaiting for them to bid, or even the consignment warehouse status and so on. So all this information the vendor can log into a specific portal that we provide to them, and they can go ahead and communicate with us effectively. For example, if we assign a purchase order to them, they can review the purchase order using the portal and do some revisions in prices if required, and we can now then go ahead and view all the changes that the vendor made in our system. Likewise, there are also other status within the collaboration activation field, which is active with PO not auto confirm, which means the vendor can confirm the purchase order in the vendor portal. And if the vendor confirms the purchase order in the vendor portal, then it will not automatically confirm in our system. So which means we still need to go ahead and confirm it. So it's to be bit safer. Like we need to confirm it twice. Once the vendor will confirm, and then we will confirm as a second step. So for that to happen, you need to keep it as not auto confirm as an option. But if you activate and keep the PO auto confirm option, then as soon as the vendor confirms the PO from the portal, the PO will be automatically confirmed in your desktop application. So you don't need to confirm it twice. So you can go ahead, filter all the POs in the confirm status, which means they're all confirmed by your vendor, and you can go ahead and directly wait for your purchase order. So that's a separate process. We will have a detailed discussion about vendor collaboration later. At this moment, my vendor collaboration is going to remain as not active. So, so this is a way that just hit on save and your vendor is saved and it's created in the system successfully. So this is one way of creating the vendor in the system, but of course there are many other fields to fill. We will come back to that shortly. But the agenda today is to explore different ways of creating the vendor. So this is one way that we can create a vendor, and it's the most simplest and straightforward way to create a vendor from the procurement and sourcing module. And of course we can also create a vendor from accounts payable module, which is if you go and click on the accounts payable module, you will still see an all vendor form, and even from there you will be able to go ahead and create a vendor. So you will basically see the same form from procurement and sourcing, and also from the accounts payable module. But just in case you wanted this vendor to be a part of multiple legal entity, this vendor is going to be our supplier, and let's say you want this vendor to be also a supplier of your another company in USA, and you want the same vendor to be a supplier of another company in Germany. So in such cases, you might need to release this vendor in multiple legal entities. There are multiple ways to do that, but I will demonstrate you through a party because that will also give me a chance to introduce you the concept of party. Creating a party, you need to get into the global address book, which is we need to go navigate to the organization administration and click on global address book, and this is where you go ahead and create a party. So party is a global record. We can access party from any company, any legal entity in the system. You can access the party from a German legal entity, US legal entity, and from our Indian legal entity as well. So it's a global record. So now let's create a party for our new vendor. So let me name the vendor as Contoso Asia Supplier, and again, he's going to be our spare part supplier. So it's again an organization and not a person. And I'm also going to give the employee count here. These are the same field that we have just filled in the vendor record, right? So we have also seen about all this field. So I'm not going to fill any of them. So I'm only going to fill the name and the organization for time being. So this let's save it, and this is the party record, and the party ID will be auto generated by the system. And let's say that your party you have an ability to also to add an address. So like click on add, and we can provide a business address, maybe let's say office address, and it could be your headquarters address or your warehouse address. In this case, it's going to be my HQ address, business address. So I'm going to choose the business category, and the country is going to be India because I'm going to give an Indian address. And let me choose a pin code. Let me choose this as my pin code, and that's my address. So this is going to be my primary address, so I will just leave it as primary and click OK. So the creation of an address we have already seen in a very detailed way during our legal entity creation, that is during our first episode. In fact, we created all this PIN number and everything during our first episode, so I don't want to go deeper into the more options in the address. You can refer to the episode 1 to know more about the address. So that is your business address, and now let's also give some office contact information. So let's start with office phone information, and let's give a pin code and also an extension. So that's going to be your office address, but the system also provides you with an ability to tag the Twitter account, Facebook, and email address or LinkedIn link and everything related with your company, that is with your supplier. So at this moment, I'm not going to fill all those. I believe I accidentally deleted it, so let me key in again. Okay, so that's the phone number and that's the extension code, and let's save this. And now in order to release the vendor, just click on the vendor button in the top. Click on the vendor button, and the vendor will be successfully released into a current legal entity, which is ADC Motor. So this is the vendor, and you see that the vendor account follows the sequence number. So we already created with the 001, and now it is 002. It's following the next sequence number. And we the party doesn't default the vendor group, so let me just provide a vendor group. Let's give the same vendor group of parts vendor, and you see that the number of employees and other things are inherited from the party, At the same time, even the address is inherited and the contacts information are all inherited from the party. So this is how I release my vendor from the party, and the vendor will be created automatically. So now I want to release the same vendor, that is the same supplier. Maybe a subsidiary of this supplier is also going to be the supplier of my German legal entity, which is DEMF legal entity. So let me now move to my German legal entity, which is DEMF. This is my DEMF legal entity. So let me get into my global address book in DEMF legal entity. Global address book. As I mentioned, the party ID is a global form and a global record, so we will also be able to see the party from this party that we created in the ADC motor from the German legal entity, and that's the party that we have created. Let me open the party record, and that's the address. In this case, you can also add an additional address for your German company, maybe your German address. But I'm not going to just do it now. I'll just release the vendor into my DEMF legal entity now. So now this vendor is created in the DEMF legal entity, and in the DEMF legal entity the number sequence is not turned on. So the number sequence is manual number sequence, it's not automatic. So I'm going to give a manual number sequence for this company. So I'm going to leave it as organization, and the group that we created in the ADC motor will not be visible in the DEMF legal entity, because the vendor groups are the legal entity level, that is within a specific company. So let's see if we have any vendor group already created in DEMF. Yeah, we have it. So I'm going to use this particular vendor code 10, which is again a parts vendor. And yeah, other informations are global, and they're automatically coming from the party, with like address and contact, etc. So now the new vendor account is created in the DEMF legal entity. So we are successfully released the vendor into the DEMF legal entity. So let me now go back to our ADC motors and refresh the party and check the party, and you will see that you have two different vendor account tagged against the party. That is your ADC motor vendor account, which is the serial number generator vendor account, and the DEMF vendor account, which is a manual serial number, that is we have keyed in this particular vendor account, and they both are tagged with this particular party. So they are two different companies but tagged to the same party and in two different legal entities. So this is the concept of a party and a vendor, and this is how we create a vendor from a party. So now let's see another quick example in the ADC motors. So in the ADC motors, let me refresh the screen. So in the ADC motors, we totally have two vendors. So one we created directly from here, and another vendor got released from the party. So now let's create another third vendor. Let's say new. Let me name them as part supplier, and let's just group them again as a spare part vendor. Okay, so let me also give it is also possible to directly give an address from the vendor itself. So let me quickly give an address. So this is going to be my office address. And yeah, so let me choose a postal code. So I'm going to choose a Delhi address. So it's a New Delhi address from India. Click OK, and that's going to be my primary address. Let me not choose any contact information for now. So the scenario that I want to show you here is, let's say that after you create a vendor record just like this, and you save the vendor record, and later in the future you need to do some internal restructuring of your vendor, or let's say your vendor group has merged into one company, or the vendor group become a subsidiary of another company, and you want to change the association of this particular vendor, and you want to associate this vendor as a part of another a parent company that you already have in your legal entity, then in order for doing all those changes, you can go ahead and do it by clicking on the change party association link. So for example, let's say this particular company is now merged with another bigger company, and now I need to change or maintain this vendor. Then I can just go and click on the change association and choose the new party record, which is going to be my company with which this vendor is merging. So let me wait for the party record to open. Let me search for my party record. Let me choose a parent company for this vendor. I can even search my company directly. Let me copy it and do that. It's a lot more easy. Just paste it, apply, and you will. I'm not finding it. So let me just search now. Yeah, I got it. So choose the vendor, select it, and then say OK. Yes. So you can see the address here, the New Delhi address will automatically change to the Mumbai address, and you will see that the name the previously we have provided parts supplier is now changed to the parent company, and even all the other information related to the parent company will change automatically. So this is a way that you can very quickly maintain or reorganize your vendor record by using the change party association link at the top. Okay. So that is about introduction to the vendor master and creation of a vendor master directly and from the party, and what is an association of the party with the vendor record. And one thing is, when you directly create a vendor in the system, there will be a party created automatically, a new party created automatically. So you can, in order for you to open the party, you might need to get into the vendor name and double click it, and it will automatically take you to the party record. Okay, so that's a general behavior of the system. So yeah, so in the next episode we will go ahead and fill in all the mandatory fields or important fields that are required within this particular vendor master, and we'll explore this vendor masters further in the next episode. Okay, until then, take care, bye, see you in the next episode.